Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am Alana Davis. I'm your host and meetup organizer. I work with e commerce shops to remove friction from the buying process. I rescue Shopify websites, making them more effective in attracting more visitors, providing better SEO, and increasing conversion rates at a fraction of the cost of a full redesign. Here's a really quick look at our agenda today. This webinar is being recorded, so assuming everything works out, I will be sharing the video in the next day or so. And if you have questions as we go, please add them to the chat box or use the Q&A option. We'll likely try to save questions until the end, unless I feel like it's a good time to address them in the middle of the presentation. So we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump on in. First of all, I want to say thank you to our sponsors. Shopify is more than just an e-commerce solution. You can sell anywhere to anyone with Shopify's e-commerce platform and point of sale features. And then Eric Davis of Little Stream Software, the maker of JSON LD for SEO, helps your Shopify store win rich results in Google search, getting you more organic search traffic that converts better, all without having to fight for better rankings or paying constantly for ads. After this session, we're going to take a break for the rest of the year and get back to it in early 2021. So if you do have any topics you'd like to see or areas you'd like me to explore in our meetups, please do let me know in the feedback request you'll be receiving in the next day or so. This also really helps me to know what's working well or not so that we can continue to provide the valuable resource for you. I did hear in the past that there was a need for ongoing conversations on Facebook. So there is the PDX Shopify Facebook group for you. Please join us, and I will be sharing the links in just a moment. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Melanie. Mel is the Chief Impact Officer at DailyKarma. Welcome, Mel.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I am excited to be here. Alana, thank you for inviting me to speak. And I'm, obviously it's been fun getting to know you over the last couple of months and jamming out on all things e-commerce and giving back. And I'm going to share my screen and kind of dive on in here and praying that nothing crazy pops up like dogs barking or anything along those lines. So bear with me just a second and I'm gonna, oops. Get going. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, gorgeous. So what we're here today to talk about is how to increase engagement and average order value with cost marketing. I think, there's a lot to cover here. And as Alana said, I will do my best to, cover at a very high level a lot of these topics and then dive in. And then ultimately, if there's anything that comes up that you're still having questions about or want to share additional thoughts with, I'm always more than happy to connect afterwards. So just a little bit about me. Hilariously, this is me pre-COVID here. I missed one, but I am Mel Lubey, and I'm the Chief Impact Officer here at DailyKarma. We do have an app for Shopify called Shop for Good. I promise you this is not a sales pitch. This is definitely meant to be informative. A little bit more about me. I have more than 15 years experience in technology, working in startups. I've worked with brands like Honda and Volkswagen, LexisNexis, Bioscience, Kia Australia, Milkbar, Adidas, Jules, and more, and various initiatives from website related back when I was agency side to more of their cause marketing initiatives in my role here at DailyKarma now. I'm also, when I'm not running DailyKarma along with my partner, I am a passionate maternal health advocate. I really believe in order to, be in the social impact space, you have to be really passionate about causes yourself. So I like to put my money where my mouth is, and I give back to my community in various ways. I'm even even hyper involved with my local community here in West Hollywood, California, where I live. And I am also a mom of two small humans, which coincidentally are not here today, although they have been known to streak through several of my meetings during the early days of COVID. So that's a little bit about me. I would love to know, what brought everyone else here. If you guys want to throw that in the chat, if there's something specific that you want to make sure that we touch on, and Alana can help make sure that she kind of bubbles those particular items up. So what are we going to talk about this afternoon. Obviously our goal here is it's to talk about customer marketing, but specifically this idea of increasing engagement and or average order value. So we'll start by doing just a brief, kind of cause marketing background, kind of the lay of the land, different types of campaigns, how to pick a cause to support, communications plans, case studies, and questions. So let's dive on in here. So let's talk about this idea of we know your customer cares. There's some staggering statistics that have been floating around for the last several years. And I think if 2020 has shown us any number of things, it's this idea that our customers are kind of demanding that brands give that back. We see that 90% of these shoppers will switch to brands associated with a good cause. When we think about the millennial market, 71% are hopeful that companies will take the lead on social change, which I think that we have seen strong glimmers of that and movement towards that, especially this year. 87% of customers would buy from a company that supports issues they care about. Other stats that you're not seeing here that, one that was really staggering to me is when we start thinking about this idea of that Gen Z customer, which are coming up, 90% of Gen Z customers believe that companies must act to help social and environmental issues. So even more so than that, kind of older millennial demographic, 90% of Gen Z. So we know cost marketing is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And then let's think about, this idea of 2020. I will avoid using the term unprecedented, but I think 2020 has definitely brought its challenges along the way. They're, both from for-profit sectors as well, as nonprofit sectors. As I was thinking about our discussion today, it always blows my mind to think about, there's not a singular vertical that's been unimpacted by this year. And when we think about the nonprofit sector, when we look at some of the surveys that have been going out, 96% of global NPOs, nonprofit organizations that were surveyed, were negatively impacted by COVID. 96%. And then, when they start to forecast the rest of their year, they were anticipating that 41% were expecting a decline in donations. And that could be from various reasons, obviously all in person. Their events have been canceled, such as their galas and other major fundraisers. So nonprofits are struggling, but the demand for their services is still existing. And one of the things that I found to be kind of a bright spot in some of these metrics and these numbers was that 66% of all COVID relief funding has actually come from corporations. So even though we're seeing the effect of COVID on nonprofits, to a tremendous degree, we're also seeing that these for-profit companies are stepping up, which is great. And so we see that brands are responding. I think this idea of cause marketing, and it's become associated with a lot of brands that we're all very familiar with, from Everlane to Patagonia, and Everlane's goal for Black Friday, as well as Patagonia, and their overarching, being a mission-driven company that's giving back and constantly innovating in the space, to publicly traded companies like Biossance. We see kind of I feel like the brands that we look to that are these larger organizations responding in this way, which is helping kind of pave that path for the rest of us. But when we think about how brands are giving back, there's a lot of different ways, because it gets complicated. Number one, there are complex US fundraising regulations, such as, different states require you to technically register as a co-venture depending on the state that you're in and the organization that you're fundraising for. That cumbersome charity vetting process. So, how do you verify that they're a charity or a nonprofit that you'd like to donate to? Also, there's the overall cost and resources that build that charity relationship. For example, many nonprofits, in order to be a true partner, require a specific donation amount, a yearly commitment of anywhere between, $10,000 and $100,000. So navigating all of that, can be ultimately a department of itself, not to mention just the idea of how do you get the money to them and the resources to actually integrate those campaigns into your website. So there's all of these different things. And I think that as we've talked to various partners over the years, it becomes a little overwhelming, and therefore people either end up doing it on the back end, where maybe they're not publicizing it on their website, or they just don't do it because it gets to be too much. Now, there are I would say for larger organizations, oftentimes they will have entire departments dedicated to social impact and CSR. Whereas for smaller organizations or more growing businesses, often they will partner with technologies such as Shop for Good to kind of manage these things for them, which is a great service to offer. But now that we've kind of established the lay of the land, like what, a little bit of that background, does anybody have any questions before we kind of dive in? No? Okay, good. So I think, when we think about the goal of cards marketing, we have to think about the fact that it is marketing. It's marketing to both increase engagement and awareness for that cause, but also to increase engagement and brand awareness. So when we think about, what type of campaign someone should be running, I think, this little tree is often helpful to recommend. So we think about who will be donating. Is it going to be the brand? Is it going to be the customer, or is it going to be a combination between that brand and the customer? Starting here, I think when we think about the brand donating, this is what I would say, like the tried and true method. When people think about giving back and they think about cause marketing, it's the brand donating. There's a lot of benefit in this. I think one, it's easy. It's easy to forecast when you're able to look and say, okay, based on current sales, this is what we forecast. You can better gauge the amount that you will be fundraising or donating. It's also low on the consumer engagement side, where that customer is not necessarily required to take any action because you're just choosing to donate either a specific percentage of the sales of a product or a dollar amount per product. We can also talk about in-kind donations if people have questions about that as well. So I think the pros of that, it's tried and true. People are used to doing it. It's what people think about when we think about cause marketing. I think when we think about the considerations and things to maybe be more mindful of, it definitely does impact profit margins. And I know from talking across the board, there are several, we are in an era where margins might be a little tighter, whether it's our wholesale businesses drop down or we're needing to make it up in other ways. And so if profit margins are a concern, or I would even say for our brand partners that are just starting out that don't necessarily know what that growth might be looking like in their business, this is a harder thing to both forecast and is a harder thing to commit to, because we want you on your business to still be around and, the following year to continue to be donating and to continue to be kind of raising awareness for those causes that you care about. The other thing is that when you are making that commitment to donate on the brand side, the customer engagement is, what you definitely can track the profitability of the product, how popular that particular product or products were that you were donating, that you were supporting. And, but there's nothing, there's nothing else for that customer to do. And so I think that's one consideration to be mindful of, just solely when when the brand itself is donating. Oops, moved a little too fast. Tricky fingers. So the next option then would be this idea of the customer donating. I think the pros here are that the donation is only made when that customer is engaging. So whether that customer is rounding up their purchase, or they're adding $1 to their purchase, or even donating and receiving a discount off that purchase. That donation's being made solely when that customer engages. I think it's an incredible way to be engaging with that customer, to kind of get a pulse to see how that customer feels about those nonprofits or those causes that you're caring about. It's a really great test for that. There's also, lower impact on profit margins. One consideration here is that, it is up to the customer. So it's harder to forecast that donation volume. One, because we don't necessarily know how that customer will be, that cause will be resonating with that customer. And, if your goal is to raise, $100,000 solely through customer donations, it's not as easy to commit to. So I think that's definitely one consideration there. Now, my personal opinion is I think there's a little bit of a sweet spot, which is both the brand and the customer. It's high customer engagement. So an example of this would be matching. We're saying you're matching a percentage of the donations that a customer were to make on your website. So maybe they're rounding up their purchase and you will match that up to $5, for example. So this allows that it's boosting your brand affinity, because that customer is feeling like they're in it with you. Your customer is engaging, you're meeting them in the middle on this, and you're in it together. definitely lower impact on profit margins, because if you're only donating when the customer donates, it's less across the board. And you also you're really doubling that impact in every time. I will say one consideration here is that it is harder to forecast that brand commitment. So if our partners, that are wanting to be really mindful of budget, which is completely reasonable, maybe consider doing something, like a matching cap, where either you're matching for a specific time period or you're matching an actual dollar amount. Alana, do you have any thoughts on this as we're kind of diving in and barreling through everything?
No, honestly, I'm looking at this and it's so interesting because I also work with a nonprofit in my day-to-day. It's called Portland Women in Technology. And, you mentioned earlier about how a lot of nonprofits are struggling because they're not able to raise the funds that they would normally raise because they've had to cancel events. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I need to be focusing on for them as well. So it's so great to hear. And then, I also do it for my business. I donate, but I don't encourage my customers to contribute as well. So I'm like, oh yeah, this is awesome.
Well, and thank you for saying that. And I will say there's, sometimes there's a little bit of a hesitation being like, oh, well, should we be asking? But we see that customers want to be engaging. I was reading a statistic earlier that as of last year, 45% of e-com customers have been donating through their brands of choice. So people want to be engaging. In fact, like when we think about consumer fundraising and donating, when we donate to a nonprofit or to a cause, we're donating because we're getting a reward. Sometimes it's an emotional reward where, I really care about what Alana thinks about me. So therefore, I want to make sure that you know that I've donated to your cause. Or maybe it's, a deeper emotional connection, to having a particular connection to that cause. But sometimes too, it is a little bit, I would say, like less altruistic. Sometimes it's, I really love that particular t-shirt. I'm going to feel better about my purchase because that purchase is benefiting charity. Or, I really want that discount. So I'm going to go ahead and add that $5 donation to my purchase so that I can get 20% off my purchase. So, tapping into this idea that anytime we're donating, we are donating for a reward, and understanding that those different triggers fall into it in various degrees, I think are really important.
Yeah. And I will say too, that I've actually made a purchase decision based on a company that did donate to something that I felt passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to their site. I was ordering coffee. I went to their site. And when I saw that they donated funds to this nonprofit, I was like, oh, I'm in. And then I did whatever I had to do to make sure I was educated enough to make that purchase, because you can make coffee purchases anywhere. So, but it was like they were going to also donate for the same amount of money. Sure, why not?
Absolutely. I mean, and a couple more fun stats just to toss out there. Now I'm kind of wishing I would have put these in my deck. We found that 71% of millennials will pay more for a product if they know that some of those proceeds go to charity. So when we think about things like profit margins, sometimes it's okay to maybe boost that profit margin a little bit to allow for that space for donating, to maybe increase that margin a little bit, to know that a portion of that will be going to charity, I think, or to a nonprofit. I think that's one thing. The other thing I think, when we talk, I feel like we could have an entire webinar about authenticity in cause marketing, which is like one of my favorite topics. But, we talk about these ideas that we know customers care. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting, especially about the younger buying demographic right now, is that 75% of them will actually do the research to confirm that brand that they're supporting is doing other things. So it's not, it's like putting your money where your mouth is, but also making sure that you are standing behind those missions and doing more. So with that, let's party on. This is, again, I feel like there could be, and there has been entire webinars solely about the best way to pick a nonprofit to support. This, I think, is very nuanced because there's not a specific formula, but what I want to offer today is just some different perspectives and considerations. If you are not sure, which type of nonprofit or cause to support, I think it's important to think about your brand values, both from stakeholders as well as other employees, because we know that when an entire organization is connected regarding their mission and the cause marketing initiatives, everybody's more excited to work on it, whether it's the copywriter that's writing the copy for the emails, or the CEO that's talking to other stakeholders, like we know that everybody needs to be buying off on that particular mission. But I also think it's, separating yourself from, what's that brand identity? Who are those customers, and how do we understand a little bit more about what aligns with them? So I think that we tend to recommend this idea of maybe picking 3 pillars. These 3 is kind of, that magical design number, but I think it comes into this idea of cause marketing as well, when, maybe say you're a t-shirt company and you're really focused on, women's health, for example, and, then, okay, there's so many different subcategories of that. But if women's health is one of your pillars, then when you're thinking about all of these different ways to engage in these different nonprofits, knowing, okay, well, as long as it falls under that one of those pillars, we can choose to support them. Maybe another pillar might be environmental, maybe another pillar might be racial justice, because obviously there's this gorgeous intersection. Like, there's not a singular cause that doesn't intersect with another cause, but I think just being mindful of, like, these are the things that we stand behind. And then if something comes up, and maybe the organization, as I think we've seen, especially this year, the organization wants to take a firmer stance on something like racial justice, you're able to really be thoughtful about it versus just kind of jumping from cause to cause. And you can even think about how that particular issue that you're looking to maybe move support to still factors back into your pillars. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So it's nuanced. I will say, like, there's not one tried or true way, but I think that one thing that you can do is ask your customers. There are tools that actually say maybe you want to offer them multiple nonprofits to support from your website. There's technology that does that, where it will actually allow you to let that customer pick from maybe 3 nonprofits that you'd like to support. And what that does is also give you that additional insight into who that customer cares about. You can also do things like surveying on email or surveying on social to help bring them into what this cause is and why it should matter. I will say, one particular partner comes to mind that had a really strong tie to a local nonprofit, and they had been throwing a lot of support behind that. It was very important to one of their founders. But when they offered to allow those customers the choice of between that and 2 other nonprofits, what they found is the majority of their customers were actually really passionate about another issue. And so it allowed that sense of communication even internally within the brand, where it doesn't mean that brand actually stops supporting the other nonprofit, but they were able to communicate more with their customer base about the nonprofits that were resonating within that group. And along those lines of local versus national nonprofits, this is a question that comes up, I think, every day within the Shop for Good community. And again, it's really nuanced. I think that one benefit in working with local nonprofits or supporting local nonprofits is that it ties you back to your immediate community. So it can be like the narrative surrounding that is authentic and true, and you're able to have, I think, a deeper connection with that nonprofit in a lot of ways. And sometimes that's really powerful because that narrative exists. And it's still, you're telling a story about why your particular organization is supporting this. However, sometimes if you are focused more on a national nonprofit, I think that can equally be as good, because it's a little bit more broad ranging. I will say with national nonprofits, the idea of things like cross promotions and even the cost for some of those partnerships tends to be a little bit more nuanced and quite a bit higher from a cost perspective, like an actual official partnership perspective. So I think, it's still nuanced. I've seen partners that, chose local nonprofits and had wildly successful campaigns. One is a company up in San Francisco called Aquis. They create hair products, and they have a nonprofit association with an organization called Simply the Basics, which produces hygiene kits for people within the community that are experiencing homelessness. And it's something that their entire staff gets behind. They, pre-COVID, and I believe they still are now, are getting together, making these kits, putting them together, as well as then you're saying, this is how we're giving back. Would you like to support them as well? Another alternative, again, is when you're allowing that customer to make that choice. So maybe you are supporting that local nonprofit, but you want to provide them a more national nonprofit that maybe does similar work to support. That's another way to proceed. All right, so we've talked a little bit about nonprofits. And again, if anybody has any questions about anything, please pop in and ask about this, because we could talk for ages about all of this. Now, let's talk about that communication plan. So you've determined the type of campaign that you want to launch. You've determined the cause or causes or nonprofits that you'd like to support. Now let's talk about your communication plan, because I think with everything, it's that idea, you know, it always reminds me of this meme that I saw a couple of years ago from Game of Thrones, like one does not simply go viral. Like you have to have a plan. And obviously with anything that you're doing within your business, your cause marketing, your marketing initiatives are 100% in that line. You have to have a plan. You have to stick to the plan. You have to revisit the plan, and you rinse and repeat. It's not just a one-off thing. You know, we know that these customers want to have, they're drawn to brands that are actively communicating their purpose. You know, Alana, it was just like you and your coffee. You know, you were drawn to that organization because you're like, oh, cool, they're giving back. I'm so much more excited about them now. And so, you know, when we're talking about kind of the ways and how that communication strategy looks, you know, talking about it before, you know, whether it's email teasers, you know, depending on the type of campaign, gearing up, countdowns, social media, the same thing. You know, even kind of having a coming soon on the website, letting people know that this is to be anticipated. You know, the idea that, you know, sometimes we worry that we're over communicating, but in reality, it's going to take those consumers, your patrons, multiple touches to really get behind something. You know, then when we think about your campaign launch, make sure that there's space on your homepage about it. You know, depending on where you're talking about, you know, the logistics of your campaign, make sure that it's something that they're seeing within the first 3 seconds of landing on your homepage. So whether it's a full banner or just a top banner, kind of utilizing Shopify's you know, small kind of free shipping banners, that's, you know, the immediate first place. You know, then obviously within your product pages, making sure that that can be actively used as an engagement tool. So if your t-shirts are benefiting a particular nonprofit, making sure that that's discussed visibly on that product page. Same thing, you know, with other places on your website, talking about your impact page. I think this is one of the things that I see partners forget about sometimes, is that people, if they're drawn to you because of your mission, they may want to dive deeper. And while you can do things to kind of keep them engaged in the purchase flow, to, you know, to kind of push them through that purchase flow, they may want to do some additional digging. So having an impact page that not only talks about what you're doing, but why you're doing it, helps to create that bridge of connection. Because I think at the end of the day, cause marketing is about connection. It's saying, you know what, this is what we care about as a brand, and this is what, you know, we're hoping to connect with our consumers on. You know, then obviously, you know, so email, you know, whether it's, you know, just to say, hey, this is what's happening, and launching that campaign effectively, but also, you know, continuing to follow up. Maybe they receive a special email after they've purchased that item. You know, there's really great things to do with various email providers like Klaviyo, that you can actually tag products and say that they receive specific email communication after that. Maybe it's a letter from the founder or the CEO, kind of highlighting a little bit more about why you chose that particular cause. Like, use it as a point of connection. Same thing with social media, you know, blasting it everywhere, stories, reels, you know, the whole 9 yards. This can also be, cause marketing can also be a really effective ad strategy. You know, we've seen some partners have really strong return on ad spend investments by actually touting, you know, that these particular products are benefiting or supporting a particular nonprofit. You know, obviously it depends on the time of the year, but I think that that's a really amazing way to proceed. And then when we think about, so your campaign is, whether it's ongoing or it's, you know, something that has a finite end date, you never want to forget about this after part. This after part is when you're talking about, okay, how did it do? What was the impact? You know, how much was raised? How many customers donated? What are your next steps? Are there other things that that customer might want to do to get involved, whether it's articles of interest or different, you know, maybe they want to volunteer. emailing those results, I think, is powerful. Social media, and then that impact highlight. So there are tools out there that allow you to actually aggregate the amount donated. And so making sure that you're showcasing them, like, look, we raised $20,000 through this particular avenue. Alana, anything to add on that based on your expertise here?
I don't know about my expertise on this one. I'm like learning so much from this. I mean, I think that you've hit it on the head quite a few times. And I love that you said a moment ago to do a follow-up email campaign with a thank you from the nonprofit that the customer ended up helping to donate to. I think that is so rewarding to not just hear it from you, the store owner, but then to hear it from the nonprofit of like, hey, your input made an impact on us, and we recognize that. So I think that that was a really cool touch that I have not seen actually in the past.
Absolutely. And along those ways too, I think, when we think about like how to communicate impact in general, again, I feel like there's an entire webinar to be had on this, but there's a lot of, I think when we're choosing organizations to support, number one, nonprofits have to be really careful about talking about impact metrics. So for example, if I were to say, the pen that I'm holding in my hand, if, my $5 was buying, a new pen, they have to be, there's a lot of rules and they could actually lose nonprofit status if they're not followed correctly. But what nonprofits are often able to do is say, $50 or $1, $5 will provide X, Y, and Z. So, I think food banks are excellent at that. There's a local food bank here in Los Angeles that $1 provides 4 meals. And when you're thinking about how people take in data, when we take in information, that becomes tangible. Same thing with breast cancer awareness. Breast Cancer Research Foundation, for example, $50 equals 1 hour of breast cancer research. So instead of just saying, thanks to you, we've raised $5,000, when you're communicating, during and after your campaign, and even pre-launch, if you have a goal as the amount that you'd like to be, contributing, our goal is to serve 10,000 meals. Our goal is to fund 100 hours of breast cancer research. There's a lot of nonprofits have these impact metrics available to you. So they're not necessarily saying, your $50 did this specific thing, but they're helping provide that context to what that donation can do. And that I've seen resonate over and over again with partners and consumers, because it just makes it tangible. There's that idea of like saying 50,000 women or 50,000 people are impacted by something. It's a hard number for our brains to get around. But if you're able to say, that this particular donation benefits one woman, or, $1 supports one woman, for example, I think can be really powerful. So I want to show you some examples of this, because I'm a visual person and I'm sure you're sick of looking at my slides. So what I've put together here is some different examples of, this was an email, talking about 100% of the proceeds of one particular necklace that went to the Salvation Army COVID response. This is actually an example of a landing page. So when we talk about this idea of impact pages, this was highlighting specifically the campaign that SheFit was doing surrounding breast cancer awareness. This organization here, this Harney and Teas, they make lovely teas based out of the East Coast. This is actually an example of that impact, where they're actually kind of bubbling up not only all of the other work that they do. They're part of 1% for the Planet. They do a lot of, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, but they're also showcasing, how much has been donated. Both. This is actually an instance where the brand matched every single donation that was made through their customers rounding up. And what's wild about this particular metric is that was only over the course of a couple of months. So I think that's really fun to see. And kind of this same thing here, where a particular partner, was highlighting directly on their homepage the different ways and the campaign that they were doing to benefit kind of racial justice. So I want to dive into case studies. So ultimately, we've talked about the nuance of like how, but I think it's important to talk about why, because we know that brands need to give back, but how is this actually benefiting business? And I think that sometimes we get a little nervous talking about those things, but ultimately I believe very strongly that if you're doing things that are benefiting society, that also are still doing benefiting your bottom line, then you have more to reinvest in the company and to give back. So I think it's really important to be mindful of that and to be okay with this idea of conscious consumerism, conscious capitalism. And so I have a couple of different case studies to showcase to you. So Ivriella is an apparel brand. I think they focus primarily in the millennial/Gen Z market. Now, what's interesting about Ivriella is they actually have I love the story about how they chose to give back to Save the Elephants. They're started by a group of younger people, and they came out of the gate knowing that they wanted to support Save the Elephants. So they actually called Save the Elephants, which is the Wildlife Conservation Network, the U.S. arm of it, and said, "Cool, we want to support you." And the nonprofit actually kind of giggled at them. They were like, "Yeah, sure, kid." Like, sure, cool, we'll send us the check. And then as the brand grew, the first check was maybe only a couple $100. The second check that they cut was a few $1,000, and then they were able to send a check for $10,000. And since Ivriella launched in 2015, they've actually been able to donate, just from the brand side, $1.9 million to Save the Elephants. So I think it served as a really good reminder that fostering these smaller relationships with brands as they grow is important. But to kind of show that coming of age story of a company that started as a mission-driven brand and how they've gone. So in this particular instance, what Ivriella did, they actually have run multiple types of give back campaigns. They're always donating 10% of net profit, period. And that's on the brand side. But what they wanted to do was actually do kind of that hybrid where they were asking that customer to engage, because one of the things that Ivriella wasn't sure of is, well, do people like our t-shirts, or do they actually care about our cause? And so when they launched this last November, from the day previously, they saw a 65% increase in cart conversion, which meant, so in this particular campaign, the customers not only had the option to round up their purchase at cart level or at checkout, but they also had the option to donate the purchase, or to donate $10 and receive 20% off plus a free water bottle. So this increased cart conversions. They saw an 18% increase in average order value from the previous day. Over the course of the campaign, which lasted, the Donate for Discount campaign was, I believe, a 48-hour campaign, and then this went through the entire holiday season. They had 21,000 individual shoppers contribute. This resulted, just in the donations that had the sales that had a donation added to them, $1.4 million. So when we talk about metrics and how we're actually proving that ROI of impact and showcasing, how this is actually beneficial to brands, I think this is an incredibly powerful example where the brand is donating this. This is strictly from the customer donations. The numbers are staggering, and it continues to be. And what was really fun was to hear these founders saying, like, this was the first time that we confirmed that our customers really cared about our cause, because even though they were getting an incentive in this particular first 24 to 48 hours of launch, they still saw a sustained engagement of 15%. And even when we see things like with, customers rounding up or adding $1 to their purchase, we've seen anecdotally that roughly 10% of those customers or more, which is a large amount, will continue to come back and donate again. So it's not just a one-off. Another particular case study or example that I'd like to show is a company called John Masters Organics. They're known for sustainability and 100% cruelty-free. They have done several different initiatives over the last year. One focused on that idea of, 20% off your purchase for a $5 donation. In their first campaign, they had never done anything forward-facing before, and they were really curious to see. It was quite a bit of a test. And what they saw within that first campaign is that they saw 56% in customer engagement, which meant 56% of their customers that were shopping that 24-hour period opted to donate. That resulted in a 17% increase in average order value. So it's spectacular. They actually even compared this with a similar campaign that they'd ran before, kind of a similar percentage off that they'd ran, I think, 2 weeks before. And even though we were asking the customer to donate, the engagement was still higher. And I think it goes back to that idea of wanting, you're investing in that purchase at that point. And so I found that to be fascinating. Now, The second part of this is, they in June, one of the marketing professionals over there was, really moved and wanted to make sure that they were doing something in support of racial justice. And so she got buy off, just because she felt like it was the right thing to do. They wanted to donate 100% of sales on one particular day, not 50%, not 10%, all of them. And it was meant, it had no other goals other than the fact that they wanted to show support for this movement. And what they found, and this is where I feel like this idea of kind of radical cause marketing ideas, where we see brands make big stands and actually have really powerful benefit. They saw a 240% increase in sales compared to the previous day. Now, what's amazing to this, as someone that focuses in the nonprofit side of things, that means, when they projected that, X amount would be going to a nonprofit that day, they actually almost tripled that amount. So that nonprofit benefited even that much more. Now, where it gets interesting to this idea of engagement and, and kind of return on investment, but they were actually really shocked to see that 44% of the customers that day were new. And when we were looking at things that were happening on social, there were comments, to the effect of, I've been following you guys. I've made my first purchase today. Thank you. They saw a 30% increase in store sessions that day. So although it wasn't an intentional acquisition tool, this initiative, because they wanted to do something big, and it's because they believe so strongly in the mission, it did end up benefiting the organization. And, and this was just strictly percentage of sales, because I think it's important to make sure that we're showing kind of lots of different use cases here. Another one, for those of you who are familiar, and I just saw a typo, which is always fun, the chef apparel brand Hedley Bennet. I think that little red ampersand is kind of iconic when it comes to them. So Hedley Bennet, they make chefswear. They focus on the food industry. They have always done kind of more, I would say, like the back end giving. But what they wanted was an easy way to actually engage their customers around these various relief efforts. So, they have a strong partnership with World Central Kitchen. And that was how, they initially kind of started this customer facing aspect, where anytime, with the hurricanes or fires, anytime, there was this massive need where the World Central Kitchen would actually get called out to an event or to something that had happened, Hedley Bennet will provides support to them by putting up different ways for their customers to engage through their website. This has been an ongoing campaign for them. They've done this several different times. One other thing that I think is really cool about Hedley Bennet, when it came to COVID-19, they were one of the first organizations here in the Los Angeles area that actually started producing masks for these frontline food workers. And so they actually, separate from all of their customer engagement side, they actually have a buy one, give one back. So for every mask purchased through their website, they are actually donating a mask to a frontline worker. So I think that, they were able to kind of present forward like how the brand itself was giving back, but they knew they wanted their customers to be able to engage as well. And so they've seen, again, high customer engagement kind of on a sustained level, which I think is spectacular. More than almost 9,000 customers engaged since they launched this initiative, in March. When we look at the amount of sales that had donations associated with them, 679,000, and then just since this year, almost $50,000 donated to COVID relief in the World Central Kitchen. So, and that's through customer engagement. So that's completely separate from what the brand itself has done. So, what questions are there?
We have one that just came in.
Oh.
Do you have advice for nonprofits on how they can take an active role in finding brands to partner with?
Oh, that is such a great question. Thank you for asking that, because I think that's definitely a side that I think is that's something that I think it needs to be addressed. I think one, putting yourself, it's either, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this, because I think, one, looking for platforms that are able to, maybe work in things like micro donations. So, like look for the technology that maybe is servicing larger bases of brands. Being active, I would say, on platforms like Shopify, I think is really powerful as well. Or, depending, I think a lot of nonprofits are actually moving, they have these kind of business development arms where they're cultivating these particular partnerships. So looking for maybe who might be following you on Instagram, or, whether I'm not super familiar with where you are, but, if you're hyper local, focusing on businesses in your area, if you're a more national nonprofit, branching out and looking for organizations that maybe have supported other nonprofits in the past, and see how you might be able to collaborate. I'm definitely open to have more of a dialogue with you about it, but I think that that it's a great question. I think, looking for, if you're local, looking for organizations perhaps in your area, and just doing some direct outreach, sponsorship, or letting them know, by the way, this is coming up, would you consider supporting us for Giving Tuesday? That's one way. Or a little bit of again, not yet, I would say Gay for Good. If you, I don't know your actual name, but if you'd like to reach out to me, I'm more than happy to have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation about like kind of your specific situation to help guide a little bit more. Okay.
Perfect. And we've got a couple coming in too. And I have some that are sort of an addition to it. So I'm going to ask this one in a two-part because you talked a lot about sharing at the end of your campaign basically how much was raised, right? So if it doesn't go well, do you still recommend having that communication go out? And then the question that came in is how do you handle that communication around a campaign that didn't raise as much as you had hoped?
That's a really good question. So let me repeat that back so I can kind of wrap my head around it. So basically, like, where maybe we don't reach those goals, right? Or maybe it didn't fly, as it maybe fell a little bit instead of flew. I think that you can look for something positive in that. Maybe it's engagement, maybe it's the number of customers. And then, also, I think maybe that's one way, and maybe instead of making it just a specific, time frame, maybe you extend it if it's something that you feel like was still resonating. And I guess that's the other side of it is looking at the campaign and maybe having a little bit more of an internal deep dive. Like, why didn't it resonate? Was it the cause, or was it how it was promoted? So, sometimes I think some things like that can also attribute to it. But when it comes to actually communicating out about it, why, maybe consider extending it. Like, we're ultimately all kind of making the rules up as we go. So if it didn't quite perform the way you'd like, push it out, extend it a little bit longer, see what else you'd like to do. You could even do something, like a flash type of thing where, maybe you're doing a crazier sale where, depending on how your margins work, but whether it's a little bit more of a bigger incentive or a bigger amount donated during a particular time period, maybe change it up a little bit. But I also do think sometimes when things don't perform, it's good to look at each of those parts of the campaign and think about, okay, was it the charity, or was it how we were talking about it, or was it the product? Like, I think it's okay to be critical and iterate, because no one, I mean, even companies like Ivoriella and Bias Lens, like, no one comes out of the gate and gets it right 100%. And so knowing that, kind of providing yourself a little grace in that regard and being like, okay, well, we didn't quite hit our goal, let's try it again. Or maybe we'll, add an additional charity to this or push it out, I think is a good way. Does that make sense?
And just to add to that too, I look at it like any other marketing campaign that you might do. Sometimes they flop, sometimes they soar. And so you have to try different things, try different levers that might amplify it some more. I mentioned a nonprofit that I work with, and we've done it in the past where we've completely bombed at something and we owned up to the fact that we bombed. And then we pushed harder to say, please help us do better. And then we were able to salvage what we didn't do before. So I do think there's ways for you to use it to your advantage, but then also it's a learning experience. And I think anyone who knows marketing knows that the first time you do it, the second time you do it, you're always going to learn things and you have to grow from it.
Absolutely. No one gets it. I mean, there are, those unicorn types of things where people knock it out of the park, right off the bat, but it is a little bit trial and error. You're getting to know your customers. You're getting to know, your cadence with everything. And every everything is a little bit different. There's no true formula to all of this. There's general best practices. So
yeah. Okay, and then I currently send 10% of all my profits to homelessness charities in my country. I make soaps and candles, contemplating changing that to like $1 per sale at checkout instead, so it's more tangible and easier to calculate.
I have questions for you, Allison, and I think that is awesome, by the way. Focusing on, those portions, our community members that are experiencing homelessness is a gorgeous way to be donating funds. You could say something. I mean, I guess my question back is, are you talking about something more like an in-kind donation? In that respect, then I think you just want to be really mindful of making sure, if it is in kind, that you want to make sure that you have a nonprofit organization that's ready to accept that. Because I think sometimes that gets a little bit tricky. We actually meant to talk about this earlier. In-kind donations are gorgeous, like the buy one, give one model. But I think where it gets tricky is ensuring that there's that nonprofit partner that actually, has committed to receiving that good, because otherwise, what do you do with that? But I think if you're talking about just kind of refiguring the impact, I think, $1, yeah, let's see, sorry, I'm rereading your question a little bit. $1 per sale, figuring out the cost for that bar, I think you could easily tweak that on the back end. And it's still just making sure that that customer is aware of the fact that it's a monetary amount, not necessarily an actual bar. So that could be something that you then dive a little bit more into your impact page. So I think my follow-up questions for you would be, are you truly talking about in-kind donations? If so, that's awesome. But I think that tends to be a little bit trickier unless you have like a local nonprofit that's ready to receive those goods, or consider talking about impact in another way. So, your purchase donates. Yeah, I'm actually struggling with that example a little bit as I'm noodling through it. I think you might be, and again, Allison, feel free to reach out to me and we can dive a little bit more into it. But I love where your thinking is with this.
Have you found that doing a specific campaign, like during the holidays, for example, or an event or something like that, does that typically drive more donations than it would if it's an ongoing, just never ending everyday purchase gets donated?
That's a good question. It's a both. It's a both. I think one, we see there's something about sustainable giving where, maybe it's just a type, whether it's something where you're maybe that you're letting that customer engage at cart or checkout kind of on an ongoing basis. And then so that's kind of ingrained into that brand's give back. So that's the ongoing part, which I do think is important. When we are looking at some of, the metrics about like, we know these customers want to engage. We know they want to engage repeatedly. So reminding them that this is part of your mission every time they purchase is great. Then utilizing the holidays or awareness days to accent that giving, I think, is the sweet spot. So you're always giving, you're always caring. And then you're accenting, Giving Tuesday is a great way to maybe double down on either, the percentage of purchases that you're donating, the percentage of sales if you're doing that, or maybe you're matching donations that day. That I think can be really creative. Or you create your own awareness holiday and do big bursts. The other thing that I think is really important, especially when we're seeing that surge of support for things like racial justice and hunger relief and all of these things related to everything that's happened in 2020, not forgetting to do it again. You do it once. We have these amazing, breast cancer awareness. Remind them, 6 months later, how that campaign went, and maybe do something else related to breast cancer awareness. So I think that when we come back to this idea of being mission driven and these pillars that our companies are standing behind, you can kind of repurpose those into multiple campaigns. So my short answer is sustained in small ways that isn't necessarily impacting your bottom line, and accenting it with bigger initiatives throughout the year.
I like that. So it's a mixture of the two. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I have a couple questions that I wrote down, so I'm going to ask those. But if you have any other questions, definitely send them over and we will address them. Throughout the presentation, you talked about millennials and Gen Zs and how a lot of the cause marketing tends to work really well with them. Do you see that cause marketing does or does not work as well with older demographics?
That's a really great question. I think that we are looking at groups that are digital natives. So, so that's one of those things. Specifically as it relates to like older demographics. I mean, obviously, they're still donating. I feel like there's maybe, and I actually should look for some data surrounding this, and I'd be happy to follow up on this. But I think there's a little more like maybe an inclination for a little more distrust. So I think being even more transparent is important all the times, or all of the time. So I don't have, actually, forgive me for that. I'd like to make sure to get back with you on some more data around that. But I think that we do see all demographics giving, but definitely those digital natives that are shopping from their iPhone, or their mobile phones in general, like it's just second nature.
Yeah, and you mentioned the word distrust in that. So I want, you and I, when we first spoke a while ago, I didn't understand a lot of the requirements around how you donate and why I might use someone like DailyKarma instead of just doing it by myself. So could you explain a little bit about why someone might want to use a tool like DailyKarma over doing it on their own?
Absolutely. So I think when it comes to things like, there's just these nuances with things like corporate co-venturing and fundraising regulations, and how do you confirm that that money is getting to charity? I think it's good to be critical of all of those things. I encourage it. And so when you're youth, oftentimes we see when there's kind of a third logo associated, whether it's a technology like ours or someone else's, you're able to say, like, for ours, it says powered by DailyKarma at the bottom of everything. And that's not just for branding purposes. It's actually showcasing to that consumer that someone else is managing this for them, which from the brand side, it's making sure that you're in compliance for things like corporate co-venturing and compliance, and you're not getting contacted and all of those things. But specifically from that customer too, it does allow for a little bit more of that trust building so that they can, there's like it's a third party making that contribution for you.
Yeah, I love it. And that's one thing that I'm struggling with myself. I started doing, so I work with a lot of different partners and I get referral links or affiliate links. And when I make money off of those, I'm like, I don't want to keep this. So I started trying to donate it. I'm going to start donating them by the end of the year of all proceeds up to a certain dollar amount. And I think that's where it's challenging too, is like, I want to make sure as a business owner, I'm following it to a T, but then also finding that balance of, making sure I'm getting that trust from the people who are going to click on those links or the people who are going to work with me because I do donate. So it's really important, I think, to make sure that I'm working with a proper tool to set it up, but then also we didn't really touch on this, but like talking about it with your accountant or CPA to make sure that you understand what your requirements are as a company too.
Absolutely. And I will say, to that end, and I know we're running a little long, one thing, there are, there's different rules as far as what's deductible and what's not. Sometimes it's actually more of a benefit to an organization to take something as a marketing expense versus a charitable deduction. Always check, check with your tax professional. But I think even that, as long as that money is going to that nonprofit, that is needing that, I think it's amazing. But then thinking, checking in with your tax professional to make sure, like, okay, is it better that we take this as a tax deduction from a nonprofit perspective or a marketing expense? And sometimes you might find that it's actually more beneficial to take it as a marketing expense.
Exactly. Cool. Are there any other questions before we say thank you to Mel?
Well, I will flash this on here. This is my information. Feel free to reach out to me. This is my favorite thing to talk about, as a lot of know. So, I'm happy to be of service to you. And if there's anything, obviously, if there's anything that I can do or any questions that you have, use me as a resource. I think there's a lot to navigate in this. And Alana, thank you. And thank you all for hanging in and talking and asking great questions. And I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Mel, so much. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. And I hope everyone has an amazing holiday season and good luck with you all, because I know it's going to be a crazy couple of months. So I hope it all goes well for everyone. Thanks so much and have a good evening.
Thank you.